A courtroom in Nuremberg, 1946. Not guilty by reason of following orders. For centuries, humans believed that morality was simple. Follow the rules, obey authority. But in this courtroom, the world confronted a terrifying question. What happens when the rules themselves are evil? This is the story of humanity's greatest invisible weapon. Not nuclear energy, not artificial intelligence. Ethics. Every decision you make is shaped by it. Every law that governs you was born from it. Every revolution in human history was fought over it. Yet most people have never stopped to consider what ethics actually does, how it works, why it exists at all. Picture the city where you live. Millions of people, each with their own desires, fears, ambitions, each capable of violence, each capable of greed. What keeps this from becoming chaos? What invisible force prevents your neighbor from simply taking what they want? What stops the powerful from enslaving the weak? Ethics, the silent guardian that stands between civilization and the abyss. Consider a traffic intersection. Cars wait patiently at a red light despite no visible enforcement. This simple act represents one of humanity's most remarkable achievements: voluntary compliance with shared moral principles. Ethics isn't just philosophy in an ivory tower. It's the operating system of human society. Without it, we're just intelligent animals competing for resources. But ethics doesn't just maintain order, it transforms it. Throughout history, ethical thinking has been the catalyst for every great leap forward in human progress. 4,000 years ago, in the deserts of Babylon, a king named Hammurabi faced an impossible task. How do you govern 1 million people with different languages, customs, and beliefs? How do you create justice when everyone has their own definition of fairness? Hammurabi's solution was revolutionary. He didn't just create laws, he created the first written ethical code that applied to everyone. If a man destroys another's eye, his own eye shall be destroyed. The Code of Hammurabi introduced a radical concept: proportional justice. Before Hammurabi, justice was arbitrary. The powerful did whatever they wanted to the weak. But the code established that punishment should fit the crime, regardless of social status. For the first time in human history, ethical principles were carved in stone. Literally. But this was just the beginning. 700 years later, in the streets of Athens, a man was about to die for asking dangerous questions. Socrates had spent his life challenging everything people believed about right and wrong. He asked a simple question that terrified the authorities. How do you know what you know? As poison coursed through his veins, Socrates established a new kind of ethics, not based on tradition or authority, but on reason. Socrates didn't just question individual beliefs. He questioned the entire foundation of moral thinking. He showed that ethics could be studied, analyzed, and improved through logical inquiry. His student Plato envisioned a perfect society built on justice. Aristotle analyzed the components of a good life. Together, they created the intellectual framework that would guide Western ethics for 2 millennia. But in the East, other minds were wrestling with the same eternal questions. In China, a government clerk named Kongqiu was developing ideas that would shape the moral foundation of 1 billion people. Confucius believed that ethics began with relationships: respect for parents, loyalty to friends, compassion for strangers. He called it Ren, humaneness. His philosophy wasn't abstract, it was intensely practical. How you treat your family determines how you'll treat your neighbors. How you treat your neighbors determines how you'll govern a nation. Ethics for Confucius was the art of building harmony through graduated love. Meanwhile, in India, a prince named Siddhartha was about to abandon everything he knew to seek enlightenment. The Buddha's insight was revolutionary. All suffering comes from attachment. Ethical behavior wasn't about following rules, but about freeing yourself from the desires that cause pain. While the West was developing rational ethics, the East was exploring experiential ethics. Both approaches were asking the same question: how should we live? But they were finding very different answers. The West emphasized reason and justice. The East emphasized harmony and liberation. But perhaps no ethical system has shaped human history more profoundly than one that claimed divine authority. Thou shalt not kill. "Thou shalt not steal." The Ten Commandments introduced a new kind of ethics, absolute moral law handed down by God. For over 1,000 years, religious ethics dominated human thinking. Right and wrong weren't matters of debate. They were matters of divine command. In monastery libraries, scholars like Thomas Aquinas worked to reconcile faith with reason. Could ethics be both divine and logical? Religious ethics provided something that philosophical ethics couldn't: universal authority. When God commands something, there's no room for argument. This gave societies powerful tools for unity and social control. But absolute authority would soon face its greatest challenge. The scientific revolution was changing everything. Copernicus proved the Earth revolved around the Sun. Galileo revealed that the heavens followed natural laws. Newton showed that the entire universe operated according to mathematical principles. If everything else could be explained by reason, why not ethics? In the coffee houses of London and Paris, a new generation of thinkers was about to revolutionize moral philosophy. Immanuel Kant asked a devastating question: what if ethical rules could be derived through pure reason, without reference to God, tradition, or authority? His answer changed everything. The categorical imperative. Act only according to principles you could will to become universal laws. Kant essentially democratized ethics. Instead of relying on external authority, he placed the responsibility for moral thinking on every individual human being. Meanwhile, in England, Jeremy Bentham was developing an even more radical idea: the greatest happiness principle. Bentham argued that actions were right if they produced the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Ethics wasn't about following rules, it was about calculating consequences. Utilitarian thinking gave birth to modern social reform. Child labor laws, workers' rights, public health systems, they all emerged from the idea that society should maximize human well-being. By 1914, humanity had convinced itself that reason and progress were unstoppable forces. Scientific advancement would solve every problem. Ethical evolution would eliminate conflict. Then came the Great War. 16 million dead, poison gas, machine guns mowing down entire generations. The optimism of the Enlightenment lay in ruins. If reason could create such destruction, what good were rational ethics? And then came something worse. A technologically advanced society that used rational methods to pursue evil ends. The Holocaust revealed the dark side of ethical systematization. When moral thinking becomes merely procedural, it can justify anything. Bureaucrats could organize genocide with the same efficiency they organized postal delivery. The question wasn't whether they could reason about ethics. The question was whether their reasoning led to human flourishing or human destruction. In the ruins of post-war Europe, the world faced a choice: accept that ethics were relative or establish universal principles that transcended national boundaries. The Nuremberg Trials established a revolutionary principle: there are some acts so heinous that following orders is not a defense. For the first time in history, individuals were held accountable to universal ethical standards that superseded national laws. The judges declared that certain moral principles were so fundamental that they applied to all humans, regardless of culture, religion, or political system. This moment birthed modern human rights theory. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted in 1948, represented humanity's attempt to establish global ethical standards. Every person, the Declaration stated, possessed inherent dignity simply by virtue of being human. Today we live in the shadow of these decisions. Medical ethics governs life and death decisions about organ transplants, genetic engineering, and end-of-life care. Business ethics shapes corporate responsibility and environmental protection. Computer ethics determines how artificial intelligence systems make decisions that affect millions of lives. But we face new challenges that ancient philosophers never imagined. What are our ethical obligations to future generations facing climate change? How do we balance individual privacy with collective security in an age of surveillance? What moral status should we assign to artificial intelligence systems that can think and feel? Consider the ethical implications of genetic engineering. We now possess the power to edit human DNA, potentially eliminating hereditary diseases but also creating enhanced humans with superior intelligence or physical abilities. The same technology that could eliminate suffering could also create new forms of inequality. Social media platforms make editorial decisions about what billions of people see and share. Their algorithms shape political discourse, influence elections, and determine which ideas spread and which disappear. These are not neutral technical decisions. They are ethical choices with global consequences. Every ethical decision creates ripples that spread far beyond the original choice. When Rosa Parks refused to give up her bus seat, she wasn't just challenging a local ordinance. She was asserting a universal principle about human dignity that would transform American society. When doctors established informed consent protocols, they weren't just changing medical procedures. They were revolutionizing the relationship between experts and the people they serve. When businesses adopted environmental sustainability practices, they weren't just responding to regulations. They were accepting responsibility for the long-term consequences of their actions. These examples illustrate ethics' most powerful property, its ability to transform individual choices into collective change. A single person's moral decision can cascade through social networks, inspiring others to reconsider their own ethical commitments. We are now witnessing the emergence of algorithmic ethics. Artificial intelligence systems make thousands of moral decisions every second: which loan applications to approve, which medical treatments to recommend, which job candidates to interview. These systems embody the ethical principles of their programmers, but their decisions affect millions of people who never consented to those principles. Self-driving cars must be programmed with ethical frameworks for unavoidable accident scenarios. Should the car prioritize the safety of its passengers or pedestrians? How should it weigh the lives of the young against the old? These aren't abstract philosophical questions. They're engineering requirements that must be coded into software. The rise of global social media platforms has created new forms of ethical responsibility. When a false story spreads to millions of people within hours, who bears responsibility for the consequences? The person who shared it? The platform that amplified it? The algorithm that decided to promote it? Advances in neuroscience are revealing the biological basis of moral thinking. We now know that ethical reasoning activates specific brain regions and follows predictable patterns. People with certain types of brain damage lose the ability to feel moral emotions while retaining their logical reasoning abilities. This research raises profound questions about moral responsibility. If ethical behavior is determined by brain chemistry, what does that mean for concepts like guilt, punishment, and redemption? Should we treat antisocial behavior as a medical condition rather than a moral failing? Gene therapy may soon allow us to enhance human moral capacities. We could potentially increase empathy, reduce aggression, or strengthen impulse control. But who would decide which traits to enhance? What would happen to moral diversity and the creative tension between different ethical perspectives? Climate change represents perhaps the greatest ethical challenge in human history. For the first time, our species faces a truly global moral dilemma that requires unprecedented cooperation across cultures, nations, and generations. The carbon dioxide released by a factory in one country contributes to sea level rise that displaces families on the other side of the world. The lifestyle choices of wealthy consumers in developed nations affect the survival prospects of subsistence farmers in developing countries. Future generations will inherit the consequences of decisions made today by people they will never meet. Traditional ethical frameworks struggle with this scale of moral complexity. How do we balance present needs against future consequences? How do we assign responsibility when causation is diffuse and delayed? How do we motivate collective action when individual contributions seem insignificant? Throughout history, ethical progress has often come through crisis and conflict. The abolition of slavery required a civil war. Women's suffrage demanded decades of activism and imprisonment. Civil rights progress emerged from confrontation and struggle. This pattern reveals a troubling paradox. Moral advancement often requires moral courage from individuals who are willing to suffer for their principles. Yet the same ethical systems that inspire this courage also provide stability and order that most people are reluctant to disrupt. The result is that ethical progress tends to be slow, incremental, and punctuated by periods of dramatic change. Gradual shifts in moral thinking accumulate until they reach a tipping point where rapid transformation becomes possible. We are living through such a transformation now. Traditional sources of moral authority, religious institutions, national governments, cultural traditions, are being challenged by global communications, scientific discovery, and cultural exchange. Young people increasingly derive their ethical frameworks from global networks rather than local communities. They face moral choices their grandparents never imagined: how to balance digital privacy with social connection, whether to have children in an era of climate change, how to maintain authentic relationships in a world of social media performance. Meanwhile, artificial intelligence systems are being trained on human ethical judgments, potentially crystallizing our current moral biases and transmitting them to future generations of machines. The ethical frameworks we embed in today's algorithms may shape moral thinking for centuries to come. Ethics has always been humanity's attempt to answer one fundamental question: how should we live together? Every generation has had to answer this question anew, adapting eternal principles to changing circumstances. We stand at a unique moment in this long conversation. For the first time in history, our ethical choices have planetary consequences. The moral frameworks we develop today will determine whether our species thrives or merely survives the challenges ahead. The technology we create, the institutions we build, and the values we teach our children will echo through time in ways we can barely imagine. We have unprecedented power to shape the future, which means we also have unprecedented moral responsibility. The invisible force that has guided human civilization for millennia now faces its greatest test. Can ethics evolve quickly enough to keep pace with technological change? Can we develop moral frameworks that work across cultures while respecting diversity? Can we inspire collective action on global challenges while preserving individual freedom? The answers to these questions will not be found in ancient texts or philosophical treatises alone. They will emerge from the choices we make, the conversations we have, and the courage we show in confronting difficult moral questions. Ethics isn't just the study of right and wrong. It's the tool our species uses to build the future we want to live in. The question that remains is, what kind of future are we building, and is it the one we really want? What other invisible forces shape your daily decisions without you realizing it? And if ethics can evolve, what moral principles might emerge that we haven't even imagined yet?